And what's happening, everybody? Welcome to your Wednesday edition of Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm your host, Dan Besbris, and we've got a variety pack of things to discuss today because we got a little bit of surgery news, the quiet offseason type. In addition to the fact that today is a Golden State Warriors day, my initial plan, by the way, was to do the Warriors and then segue into the Northwest Division. But given that we did get a couple, I would venture to call them pretty damn interesting pieces of news, two of them surgery-related, one of them signing-related, and then two of those actually tie together a little bit. I thought we'd, instead of doing a second team on today's show, we could actually just spend a little bit of time on NBA news. I'm available on Twitter if you need to reach me, at Dan Besbris. You can follow at Old Man Squad over on social media, and it will follow you back, ladies and gentlemen. I'll say that again. If you'd like a quick follow, just follow at Old Man Squad over on social media, and it will follow you back. Unless you're some sort of weird porn bot, in which case then it will not. It will not follow you back. And there's quite a few of them. Man, Twitter, what a place these days. So let's start with Nuggets or news. Sorry, I don't know why I said Nuggets. Brain got distracted by Twitter. Unacceptable. Let's start with the news of the day. And there were three pieces of news that broke over the last 24 hours. And we'll just do it chronologically, what can I say? Go big to small or whatever. But the first piece of news that broke was yesterday, really shortly after we aired our podcast. Gary Trent Jr. signed a one-year deal with the Milwaukee Bucks. Word on the street is that he had similar offers from other teams, but the Bucks promised him a starting job, and that was ultimately the direction that he went. How to handicap this? Well, to do that, we kind of need to look at the other news in the NBA. And one of those pieces, which just broke moments ago, was that Khris Middleton underwent arthroscopic surgery on both ankles, but is expected to be ready to start the season. I'll say this. I'll believe that when I see it with Middleton. He's been an injured mess for the better part of like 2 full years in a row. And this certainly feels like it's a trip right back to that same spot again for him. So unless we get definitive proof during training camp that Khris Middleton is fine, then I think he is another guy that you probably move into the do not draft board, which was kind of where he was this last year. After the previous year, it was, he's not going to be quite ready to start the season. They made it seem like he was 4 or 5 days away, and then he was out for the first 6 weeks of the year, re-injured himself, and missed like another month after that. That was 2 years ago now. I mean, it truly feels like yesterday, but we're at 2 full seasons of mess on the Khris Middleton front, and it looks like we're headed towards mess number 3. I mean, maybe he's at training camp. Maybe he's truly at full strength by then. But I find that extraordinarily hard to believe with as slowly as he's healed over the last little bit. So then we look and you pivot back to the Gary Trent Jr. thing because the Khris Middleton news is a lot easier to handicap. You're just like, look, if this dude isn't healthy at training camp, you're not drafting him because you don't want to draft injured players to start the year. It sets you way too far behind the 8 ball. We've done many shows over the years on why it's a bad idea to get off to a slow start like that. So I don't feel like we need to go too far down that same trodden path on today's show. Instead, it's important, I think, to look over at Gary Trent Jr., who basically just slots right into the Malik Beasley hole on the Bucks because Beasley is in Detroit now. Malik, this past season, averaged about 30 minutes a ball game. Yeah, Bucks have other options they could play on the wing, but ultimately, it ended up being a whole lot of Beasley. He averaged 11.3 points, 2.8 3-pointers, 3.7 rebounds, 1.4 assists, just 0.8 combined defensive stats. Really not good there. Beasley shot 44% from the field. All of his shots almost were from three-point land, and just 71% at the free throw line, although he didn't really get there. So, not good, but also not really bad because he didn't do anything. Malik did shoot 41% from downtown, which is his best since 2019, 2020. Back with the Timberwolves, he shot 42.5%, and he's bounced around. He's been in the high 30s many times. He's cleared 40 one other time. That was with the Nuggets. Role was smaller there. The that time with the Timberwolves was also kind of a limited sample size. That was just like 3 weeks of basketball. This was, by all accounts, Malik's most productive full season of NBA activity. Not stretch, but full season. It was, well, okay, I guess that's not fair, because the following year with the Timberwolves, when they were still bad, he averaged 20 points a ball games. That was his most productive year, and he shot 40% from downtown. This was, I would argue, his most efficient year. That's a safer way to put it. Full season that he's put up, while actually having like a pretty good amount of stuff to do. But it still wasn't remotely close to enough. Malik Beasley finished the year at number 159 in 30 minutes a ball game, largely because he got just 9 shots. For a guy of Beasley's fantasy profile to have actual fantasy value, even with the extraordinarily low turnovers, because that was his second best category this year behind three-pointers, he needed more to do. Gary Trent Jr. this past season finished at number 144 in Toronto in 28 minutes per ball game and 12 shots per game. So I know what you guys were thinking. As we were talking about Malik Beasley, you're sitting over there going, Dan, why are you talking about Beasley? Gary Trent has a better fantasy game than him. Well, the reality is, not really. One thing that Gary Trent Jr. does better than Beasley is get steals. He averaged 1.1 steals per game this year, and that's been pretty consistent throughout his NBA career. He's been a decent steals guy. He's had a couple seasons there where he was actually extraordinary in steals, but that also felt a little bit fluky when all of a sudden he jumped all the way up to 1.7. Came back down this year. Yes, the minutes were a little bit lower, although, again, if you're looking back kind of earlier in the career, he had a split 2020 and 2021 season between Portland and Toronto, where he was at about 1.1 steals per game. Then that number jumped up to 1.7. He was also playing a career-high 35 minutes per game. Last year, he stuck at 1.6. This year, Toronto got a new head coach, Darko, instead of Nick Nurse. They did less gambling. The steals came down. In addition to the minutes, but steals came down faster. What does it mean if Gary Trent slides into the 30-minute role that Malik Beasley had? Well, it means two very different things depending on the health of the guys around him. That's a team that has Giannis Antetokounmpo, Damian Lillard, and Khris Middleton all well in front of Trent in the shooting pecking order, in a way where in Toronto, yes, he obviously wasn't one of the preeminent guys, but Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby got moved out of the way, and so Gary Trent got to do a bunch more in the later parts of the year. It's not rocket science. Second half of the year, he took 14 shots per game. He was number 87. As they continued to unload bodies and guys got hurt, his usage went up. The last 2 months of the year, Gary Trent took 16 shots per game, and he was number 52. It ain't about the minutes with Trent. The minutes didn't change by that much over that span. They went up by like 2.5. 2.5 minutes is not going to move him from 144 to 52. It was the jump from 11 or 12 shots per game to 16. His usage spiked by almost 50%, even though his minutes only jumped by about 12 to 15. He goes to a Milwaukee team where, again, as the fourth fiddle, there just ain't much left. You've heard Beasley taking 9 shots a game, and it's not like he's going to have a clear path past even like a Brook Lopez, provided he's still there as the fourth option on that team. And Bobby Portis, coming off the bench, he's going to take a bunch of shots. There just really isn't a universe where, when healthy, on the Bucks, Gary Trent is going to get more than 10 shots per game, and that puts him right in that same area that Malik Beasley was. But if this double ankle surgery to Khris Middleton turns out to be a thing, which everything with Middleton seems to turn out to be a thing these days, well, then all of a sudden now maybe you can get Gary Trent up to 12.5 shots per game. This past season, that wasn't quite enough, 12 shots per game. But also, if the 28 minutes became 31 or 32, that actually does matter, because then the rebounds maybe a little bit better, maybe the assists maybe a little bit better. Perhaps the steals go from 1.1 up to 1.3 or 1.4. That type of little tweak, when you're ranked 140th, you suddenly add 0.3 of a steal, you can jump all the way up near the edge of the top 100. But to me, that's the outlook for Gary Trent Jr. You're talking about a guy who's probably top 100 range when one person is injured, which is kind of like what we got out of Beasley when one person was injured. He was like in the 80 to 100 range, but he was also shooting way out over his skis on three-point percentage. When that came back down to earth, he would have been around 100 as well. So treat Trent like Beasley in a lot of ways. Better steals, probably slightly lower field goal percent. He's a little smaller, so assumption would be maybe the rebounds are a little bit less also. It's little stuff, but, could be. One would hope that Gary Trent could be a positive in free throw percent, but he's kind of bounced around a little bit in his career, so it's a little bit hard to know on that front. But overall, one replaces another. In, one out. Who was Calvin Booth, who was the Nuggets GM, who was talking about how as an NBA GM, you have to be ready to replace your fourth and fifth best players. And KCP was like, oh, me? Bye. And that's kind of what happens here with the Bucks. Malik Beasley was like, I'm going to go to that place, do the same general stuff, but maybe get a few more shots. Gary Trent's like, you know what? I'm going to go to that place where I'll do a little less, but maybe I have a chance of winning. So, revolving door. So, no, I'm not drafting Gary Trent Jr. Even if he's going to play, he's not going to get enough shots to be fantasy relevant unless multiple players go down. I think you really need Middleton to go down to get him to, you could probably start him in most head-to-head leagues at that spot. Roto games cap remains very iffy. Now, if Dame goes down, that's where things start to get a little bit more interesting, because Middleton, just due to his body being kind of trash these days, he's not doing as much as Dame. And he ain't about to do as much as Dame. Middleton only took 12 shots a game this year, with his minutes being kind of artificially pushed down. If Lillard goes out, he's taking 17, 18 shots a game with him. That is where you start to look and Trent and say, okay, well, for as long as Dame is out, maybe he can get 13 shots. Maybe you're talking top 90 in that span. But he's a burger board guy. The other bit of news from this morning, last night. Yeah, that was yesterday. Kyrie Irving underwent surgery on his hand. And like Middleton, they're hoping he'll be ready to go for the start of the season. Broken left hand is a 2-month thing, though. 2 months gets us to about the end of September, and then you kind of get into the ramp-up mode. So there's a shot. Apparently, there's a shot on both of these dudes, Middleton and then also Kyrie, that they'll be ready for the start of the season. But this is something we need to keep close watch on. The big reason to watch this, well, two big reasons. Obviously, reason number one is, what do you do with Kyrie Irving if he's, say, not fully healthy at training camp? He's already a dude that struggles to play 60 games in an NBA season. And if you come into the year not fully healthy, it becomes way harder to actually get to that marker. So if Kyrie Irving is not healthy at the start of the year, I don't think you can draft him either, unless he falls down near 30, then you kind of have to. But the other side is that Klay Thompson would be the guy to step into a much larger role. Because remember, what am I looking at here? The Tim Hardaway Jr., that's where brain is not right today. I was telling my son this during our drive to go pick up a friend for camp drop off. My brain is very ADHD today. Klay Thompson, who you guys remember I came on this show and I was like, look, I don't think he's going to be able to do enough in Dallas because there's just like he was taking 15 shots a game with the Warriors to get to that edge of the top 100. If he's sliding into kind of the Tim Hardaway spot, that was 12 and a half shots. Klay will probably start in Dallas, so that does give him a little bit of a better look at it. But getting Klay back to 15 shots with Kyrie and Luka both healthy, I thought was going to prove to be pretty damn difficult. If one of those guys is down, Thompson becomes much more interesting. Then he almost has no choice but to take 15 shots. And unless he's absolutely atrocious, unless he's shooting like 39%, 15 shots is enough to get him to that top 100 marker. I also think you're going to get kind of an angry version of Klay. I don't know if that's going to be a good or a bad thing, but I'd be pretty surprised if he did the exact same, just sort of fantasy profile-wise, as his time at the end here in Golden State. Dude needed a change of scenery. All those catastrophic injuries cost him 2 seasons. So this news on Kyrie makes me just the tiniest bit more bullish on Klay Thompson. Head-to-head leagues, he's going to be the head-to-head versus roto discussion on Klay Thompson, I think, is one that we should probably very quickly have here before we move on and talk about Klay's former team in Golden State. Because on the roto side, when that Dallas team is healthy, I don't know that Klay's going to be a 12-teamer. Probably sits in the 115 to 130 range, unless, again, he dramatically retools his fantasy game, which I don't think is going to happen. But when, say, Luka or Kyrie has to miss a ball game, and now suddenly there's fear that Kyrie might miss some right out of the gate, and Klay is playable, then okay, you draft him in roto, you drop him into your lineup for those games. But he's good enough that he's probably not going to be droppable. Like, you can't just drop Klay Thompson to the waiver wire. Someone's going to pick him up and do what you were trying to do with him. So I think on the roto side, you'll end up sitting on him for about half the season, sporadically, intermittently deploying him against, really bad opponents, or when Luka or Kyrie is out, or whatever the situation kind of warrants it. Head-to-head, actually, he's an easier play because, like, you can say all you want about the injury-prone stuff. Those are 2 massive, massive injuries. And this past season, Klay played in 77 out of the Warriors' 82 ball games. So he was, by and large, back to being sort of the Klay of old who played through little things. He just doesn't have the speed or the lift that he used to have. So I don't think you can just magically expect field goal percent is going to go back to where it was, or steals are going to go back to where they were, or whatever you want to, like, cross your fingers and pray on. But again, if you're talking about a guy who's like 125 range when the team is healthy, that plays in head-to-head. It's not fun, but it plays. And then if you get those 75, 65, whatever kind of games blended in when one of the 2 real lead horses on the team is out, he can kind of cover a little bit of that gap and maybe get back to closer to where he was with Golden State last year. So it's one of those things where at the end of the season, we might look back and say, oh, Klay Thompson, he was, number 112 this year, but it might be, 130 when the team is healthy and 65 when the team has a superstar out. It's just that, say, team was healthy for 55 out of 82 games, and he got more to do for the other third of the year. And so then that balances out closer in overall numbers to the bad iteration. But there were 27 extremely playable games cap type of games in there. And the full aggregate, if healthy too, would then make him startable on the head-to-head side. More than one way to skin a cat, as they say. Let's talk about the Golden State Warriors. That was the news of the day, and I thought it was, pretty interesting stuff that we kind of needed to go over. The Warriors are a very complicated team to handicap right now. They are one of the most difficult, frankly, I think, to get a good feel on. And historically, when I've been presented with a situation like that, there are 2 ways to go about dealing with it. Way number 1 is the path of least resistance, which is to look at a team like the Warriors and wave your hands and say, you know what, this is a freaking mess. Probably best not to go down that path. There's some merit to that way. And then there's the other side, which is, okay, let's get out the frickin' scalpel. We're going to need a magnifying glass and some tweezers for this metaphor, because we're going to pull all little pieces apart and say, is there some little direction we can kind of wiggle our way through with a little WD-40, loosen up the gears and find something in there? What we do on this podcast, and what I've always done on fantasy shows that I've hosted, is to try to find the biggest payoff for the least amount of work. And I don't want you to think that that means I'm lazy. I hope and nothing I do comes off as laziness. But my goal has been and always will be to teach you all how to be very, very good at fantasy basketball without having to spend 100 hours a week on it. The dude that spends 100 hours a week is probably still going to be better than us. But I think we can get to within an almost... Now, I'm not talking about Dynasty. I ain't catching those dudes for, what's going to happen 5 years down the road. But I don't need to. For redraft, I think that with the way we play things on this podcast, we can get to within the tiniest little sliver of the uppermost best fantasy players in the universe, the folks that are spending 12 hours a day on this stuff. And I think we can get freaking close to what they're doing in like 10% of that effort. I'm going to do more than that because I need to be able to present this data to you guys in a digestible way. But my hope, again, is that I can teach you all how to go at 10% of the true, like 0.001% maniacs of everyone. And frankly, that gets you close enough to beat them on a lot of occasions. Because you're always playing the odds in fantasy basketball. You have some hits, you have some misses, whatever. Like, if you're that close in overall ability and skill and effort, like payoff to someone, you have a damn good shot to win. And then you also still have the other, 75 hours a week back that they're spending on this stuff. I say these things and then people are going to be like, oh, Dan, you're ragging on people that spend that much time. No, I'm not. I do spend that much time on it. So I'd be clowning on myself. I'm spending, well, in the off season, it's not quite that much. But during the season, it's like 10 to 12 hours a day. I'm staring at this basketball, so that I can repurpose it, repackage it, and present it on a podcast or on Twitter or whatever it is in a way that makes it super fast and easy for other people to say, oh, okay, I get what he's going on. Here's how I can do that fast. And that's where the Warriors have to fall somewhere in the middle for us in how to attack this stuff. Because there's a few things that are easy that you can just push off to the side. Steph Curry is still going to be the man. Duh. You might even argue more so than usual because Klay Thompson was kind of the only dude on the team that was willing to take shots away from Steph on the regular. And now they've brought in guys that are not going to be dudes that are like, oh, yeah, we'll take shots away from Steph. We feel confident doing that. I'm as good a shooter as Steph Curry. Because for a while, Klay Thompson could pretty much make that claim. They were 1A and 1B. And now Klay's lost his lift, so there just really isn't a 1B anymore. And if there is, he sure as bleep ain't on the Warriors. Sorry, Buddy Hield. It's not you. I don't care how many threes Buddy Hield has made over the last few years. He ain't Steph Curry. And he certainly ain't pre-2 years of injury Klay Thompson. So Klay's gone and Chris Paul's gone. That's the big out for Golden State. Chris Paul played 26.5 minutes a game this last year. Klay Thompson played close to 30. Those numbers were higher at the beginning of the year. They tapered as the season went on. When the Warriors were like, these you-know-whaters are old as dirt. We got to go another way. It didn't go down to 0, but just for posterity, we can pull up, the second half of the season. Whoops. If Basketball Monster would let us do that without doing a weird page refresh. And there we go. Klay's minutes, you can see lower second half of the year, down to 29. Chris Paul down to 25. For CP, those numbers came down even further in the final, 3 to 5 weeks of the season, but we'll just leave it on the second half. So this is what the second half of the season looked like. Steph played 32 minutes a game. Klay was 29. Dre was 28. Kuminga was 30. Wiggins was 28. Chris Paul was 25. Podziemski was 28 and a half. Trayce Jackson-Davis was 18 and a half. That's a number that actually continued to trend slightly upward as the season moved along. And then you had, a smattering of minutes for Gary Payton II, Moses Moody, guys like that. Dario Saric dropped into a game parachuting in every once in a while. So, quick analysis here. Remove Klay's 29, Chris Paul's 25. Pull 54 minutes out of the treasure chest. Or, sorry, flip that around. Put those minutes back in. Treasure chest holds the availability. However, so immediately there, and you guys might remember this show when I was like, the Warriors signed Anthony Melton, but they lost Chris Paul and Klay Thompson. That's fantastic. Melton can slide into high 20s in minutes. No problem at all. Womp womp. Well, that didn't stick. The Warriors' big signings this offseason were DeAnthony Melton, who we already mentioned, Buddy Hield, and Kyle Anderson, also known as Slow Mo, because everything he does occurs in slow motion. How do you take 54 minutes that went to 2 players and distribute those 54 minutes to 3 players when you also have to consider the fact that if you're probably going to give a few more to Trayce Jackson-Davis in this mix? And are you trying to keep Kuminga at 30? Probably. Draymond up near 30? Probably. So now you've got Steph, who's locked into starters minutes. Low 30s is the hope. They don't want his body to break down. You've got Kuminga near 30. You've got Draymond probably near 28. Those are the things I think you can say are basically locked in stone, which if you're going to do the whole 48 times 5 thing, which 240, and say, okay, well, take 240, subtract, what do we want to call Kuminga, Steph, and Draymond? About 90 between the 3 of those dudes. That's what it was second half of last year. It was like 90 and a half. You've got 150 minutes left to split between Andrew Wiggins, Brandon Podziemski, Trayce Jackson-Davis, Buddy Hield, DeAnthony Melton, Kyle Anderson, Gary Payton, and Moses Moody. I said 8 names. 150 minutes. Would have been really nice if I could have just said 5 names, huh? Well, life ain't that simple. I don't think they're going to give Moody 0. I don't know what it's going to be. He got 17 a game the second half last year. Maybe call it lower than that. Call it a dozen. Okay, fine. That's somewhat helpful. That gets us down to 138 to the remaining 7 players. Yeah. What about Gary Payton? Is he going to be around a dozen also? He's better than that defensively, but we can go low on him and say another 12 to Gary Payton when he's healthy. Okay, now we're at 126. Still 6 players to deal with. What's Trayce Jackson-Davis? 24? Think we can get him to 24? What about why don't we look at the final 2 months of last year? What was he at then? 22. He was at 22 in there. You want to say 22 for Trayce Jackson-Davis? Because that was good enough to get him damn close to fantasy value, and he very much was valuable if you were punting free throws over that stretch. Okay, that gets us down to 104 for the remaining 5. Is that where we're at now? I've forgotten which 5. I think it's the 3 new guys, Wiggins and Podziemski. Those are the 5 guys that I figured would get the most minutes in that group. And right now, it seems like each of them is only on pace for about 20, based on the math we just did. Okay, let's play another game here. Why don't we say that Moody gets DNPs? They're not even going to play him. Okay, great. So that gives us 150 to 7 players. And in this particular case, what were we at? I said 104 to the remaining 5 guys. Crank that up now to 116 to the remaining 5 guys. Helps a little bit. Gets you to what? 23 minutes a game, roughly, for those 5 dudes? Okay, we're sniffing it now a little bit. Do we think Gary Payton gets a DNP? I actually don't. I think one of Moody or Payton is going to play in most ball games. So I don't know that we can go much more liberal with our remaining minutes than that. So who's not playing? Is Wiggins going to get dialed down? Is he going to be an 18-minute guy? Because that would still get us to 98 for the remaining 4. That's still lower than 25 minutes a game for the remaining dudes. Did I go too high on Trayce Jackson-Davis at 22? I didn't think I went all that high on him. What I think this means, and again, trying to repackage this in a way that's more sort of digestible, is that for those 7 guys, and I'm just ignoring Moses Moody for now, even if he potentially does get to play a little bit, is there's going to be a hot hand element. Because not any one of those dudes can really definitively say, I am better than these other guys. I think Podziemski is going to have maybe the best claim to minutes because he's a Swiss Army knife type. He's a hustle guy. He's probably going to get overdrafted because everybody was like, Podziemski, that was so much fun last year. And he finished at number 200, basically, in not that far off starters minutes. Like, I don't know. What are we thinking we're going to get out of Brandon? He played 28 and a half minutes a game second half of last season, averaged 9, 6, and 4, which, I mean, people are going to say, 6 and 4, but also he doesn't shoot. He doesn't really get that many steals. He doesn't block shots. He doesn't shoot the 3 ball, and both percentages were bad last year, so kind of a long way away. Buddy Hield, who we were just talking with this one of the analysts last week, he'll probably come in and he'll probably have a couple of good ball games, and then we'll all be like, sweet, Buddy Hield, and then they're going to remember or they're going to notice that he's actually not very good at a lot of other stuff, and then he'll get jumped over by someone. You guys know I love DeAnthony Melton's fantasy game, but is 24 minutes enough? Hard to say. I think the Warriors are an incredibly difficult team to make a compelling argument to draft any of those guys. I think you'll see Kyle Anderson come off the bench because they're going to need spacing around Kuminga and Draymond Green in the starting lineup. And if they play Trayce Jackson-Davis, they're going to need a lot of spacing. So it'll have to be Steph and probably whoever's the best shooter left, which would be Hield. Or do they bring Trayce Jackson-Davis off the bench, start Draymond at the 5 for a little bit more space, and then that would give them the opportunity to say, okay, we could go Wiggins, we could go Podziemski, we could go Melton. So it'll be Steph, Draymond, Kuminga. I think those 3 guys are locked into the starting lineup. And I think you probably see them go with Trayce Jackson-Davis at the 5 to start the year because they kind of liked what they were getting there. And then Buddy Hield would probably be the 2. So if you're thinking about, and we may get more information on this at training camp, but certainly among all of those guys vying for stuff, which again is Wiggins and Podziemski and the 3 new guys and Trayce Jackson-Davis, the best pathways, I believe, to fantasy value at the start of the year are Jackson-Davis and Hield. I don't know. I think Jackson-Davis has a better shot to hold fantasy value throughout the season. I think Hield probably flames out at some point, and then they'll try Wiggins there, and they'll try Podziemski there, and they'll rotate through bodies to see who fits just from a who goes where standpoint. But right now, and you guys can probably see where I'm going with this, if you were like, Dan, you have pick 140, which of the Warriors' 6 guys fighting for the minutes of 2 guys are you going to draft? My answer is Trayce Jackson-Davis or nobody. I don't think I'm drafting Melton because I don't think the path is clear enough. I don't think I'm drafting Hield because I don't think the path is clear enough. And if I did draft Hield, it's what I would do that I mentioned on a pod last week, which is draft him, hope he starts for 2 weeks, trade him, sell immediately. Draft him at like pick 140. Hope he goes for top 80 value for 2 weeks, and then see if you can get someone near the top 100 rest of season range. Boring top 100 type, because he'll almost definitely beat him. Because they're just like, there's almost no way that Buddy Hield is just going to drop in and take Klay Thompson's job. He doesn't have that legacy power. And it took most of the season before Steve Kerr was finally like, Klay, bro, you're too slow now. We got to go to more speed. You can't keep up. Come off the bench and chuck. And that may be the job for Buddy Hield. Come off the bench and fire. But 15 shots a game, which is what Klay took last year, that's a lot. And what does that mean for Buddy Hield? How much does he need to do to get to fantasy value? Well, this past season, he was at number 126. He played in 84 games because he went from a team that had a heavy early season schedule to a heavy late season schedule, but we can ignore that for a minute. At 10 shots a game, he got to number 126. So Hield doesn't need 15 shots to get there. He needs about a dozen. 12 shots a game would get Buddy Hield to the top 100. Can he get to 12? Yeah. At least the beginning of the year, I think he can. Can DeAnthony Melton get to a good role? I mean, he profiles to me as a guy that if he can show he's healthy, eventually starts taking a bunch of those minutes. And then they're really a total logjam at that point. So at pick 140, just to go back to that same proposal, Trayce Jackson-Davis, Buddy Hield are the two Warriors I would look at in that big chunk at the start of the year. And then you probably try to sell high on Hield before the wheels come off, because they always do. But he's got a shot to get inside the top 100, at least for some small stretch of time. And then if the Warriors decide they want to go young and athletic and rim runny, then that's how Jackson-Davis gets there. But he's also a really, 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 really bad foul shooter, and you kind of have to be cognizant of that as well. I'm actually kind of hoping that the Warriors play coy with their starting lineup during training camp. Because if people see that it's Hield, you might have to draft him at like pick 110 or 100. And I don't know that I would want to go there, because I do think eventually the shine comes off and he ends up doing very little again. But if the confusion remains and you can get any of these guys a round or two deeper than that, like I mentioned, 130, 140, then I think there's probably a reason to try. But I don't think Wiggins is going to do enough this year. He would probably be my third choice among that group. I don't think Podziemski's fantasy game is developed enough for it. I don't think Melton's back can hang in there to the type of workload that I would want him to have, even though, again, I love his fantasy game. And that takes us through most of the names that are of relevance. And also brings us to the part of the show where I once again remind all of you guys to please take 5 seconds and click the like button while you're watching this thing. It's really funny. There's like 7%, 7 to 10% of you guys actually bother to click it that are watching the show. Please, let's go a little higher than that. Come on, do it immediately. Many of you are making it to this point, right? Some of you are, maybe not all. Whatever. Not my problem, I guess. Oh, no, it is my problem. And then if you're listening after the fact, please take a second to drop that 5-star review. I know a bunch of you guys have been thinking about it, and you're like, I'll get there. Don't worry about it. Do it today. So like, rate, subscribe. Follow me on Twitter at Dan Vespers. Follow Old Man Squad on Twitter at Old Man Squad. That's a really easy one. I have my name, it as its name. Tried to make it simple enough. Old Man Squad, a lot easier to spell than Dan Vespers also. Tomorrow, likely 2 teams from the Northwest Division. I don't want to get out too far in front of myself. Friday, likely the Brilliance, the Shimmering Opulence. That is my good buddy, Rhett Bauer. That'll be Friday's show. Also, if you have a moment to check out my friends over on the Menace Podmen basketball podcast, we will be doing a Pop-Tart draft tomorrow morning. I can't wait. It's been in my Twitter bio for a dozen years, a Pop-Tart connoisseur. Now that I'm lactose intolerant, it's severely limited the ones that I eat on a regular basis. But in college, I went to Berkeley, so we didn't do a lot of drinking up there. There's other stuff in that zone. I had a whole wall of Pop-Tart flavors in our cabinet. There were 5 of us that lived in a house together, and we all had like our space in the cabinet, and mine was whatever random crap, and then like 6 different flavors of Pop-Tarts. Like, I don't know if I'm going to win the Pop-Tart draft or not, but I'm sure as you know what, going to be putting my whole butt into it. Okay, everybody, have a lovely Wednesday. It's lunchtime here on the Pacific Coast, so I'm going to go get myself some grub. Like, rate, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys on social, and I'll see you tomorrow.